Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today we have finally reached the 3rd of September 1651. So today, 369 years ago, we have the Battle of Worcester being fought on a front line of 8 miles long. And people don't realise that Worcester is a big battle. We've got 12,000 maximum of the royalist forces under the Duke of Hamilton, or technically under the command of Charles, later to become King Charles in 1660. And then we also have Oliver Cromwell bringing forward 30,000 men, which was predominantly made up of new model army and also this civilian army, these civilian armed people which were known as the militia, including the Worcester militia, which are now fighting on the Parliament side. As I said in the earlier videos, there is nothing faithful about the city of Worcester, especially so in 1651. So we're on the 3rd of September and the battle technically started at around about 6 a.m. But before we do that, let's take a look at the opening positions of both armies. So for this, I have brought a map. And it's the same maps that I use when we do our battlefield tours. So here we have our opening battle lines for the Battle of Worcester on the 3rd of September 1651. So a few things to look out for. Here we have the River Severn flowing from the north down to the south, and remember, if you go north of Worcester you eventually get to Bewdley, where there is a force of parliamentarians preventing Charles from escaping back to Scotland, as we mentioned in an earlier video. If you think back down to the river here, at the south end we've also got Upton-on-Severn, and if you remember, on the 28th of August 1651 there was a battle where the parliamentarians took Upton and therefore had both sides of the River Severn, a very strategic part of the Battle of Worcester fought before the 3rd of September. Eventually you also get into Tewkesbury and Gloucestershire, well-known parliament areas of Britain, so there's going to be no escape south basically. But as well as the River Severn, we also have the River Team snaking its way through the countryside there, and here we have Powick Bridge, and in particular Powick Village and Church. And the reason why that's important is because the stone building behind me is in fact Powick Church. We started our look at the Battle of Worcester at Powick Church, and that's important, as I will explain in a moment. The interesting fact about Powick Bridge itself is this is where the battle was fought on the 23rd of September 1642, basically the start of the English Civil War. So they're going to be fighting over the same area as it was earlier in the First Civil War, and that's quite an interesting fact. Worcester sees the first and last clash of arms of the entire Civil War. You've also got a couple of little brooks. We have Frog Brook that runs down, very small actually, it's still there today, it's pretty much what feeds the Worcester to Birmingham Canal, and it runs pretty much where Severn Street is today really, and it flows into the River Severn. The other one is a bit of a larger brook, and that's still there also. It runs through an area known as Cherry Orchard today, and that's called Duck Brook. So we've got Frog Brook and Duck Brook as well. They're not major obstacles. You can literally leap across them, or if you want you can get your ankles or knees wet by crossing them. But the problem is the River Severn and the River Team are big obstacles, very difficult to cross with horses, very difficult to cross even on foot, even swimming across. This is an age with gunpowder, black powder, which once it's wet will not work, so soldiers will not want to be crossing that water, only across the bridges, and there is technically two. One at Powick Bridge and one across the Severn at Worcester itself. So it's 6 a.m. At 6 a.m. on the 3rd of September 1651, the soldiers were in battle positions. In other words, if we take a look at the royalists first, they're in blue. We have most of the soldiers have come out of the city centre. We've got Leslie, who was the argumentative man in the army, constantly complaining about the Duke of Hamilton and complaining to Charles. He had mainly the cavalry detachment that was set up, interestingly, on Pitchcroft Racecourse, which sees horses even today. As we come round to the east, we've got the Duke of Hamilton really occupying the area outside the city walls along here, in the area of Blockhouse, for example, St Martin's Gate, that area. And then we've got Charles himself commanding the south side of the city, the area in Sidbury and London Road. Now, as well as that, on the west bank, as how would you call it really, a precautionary measure, we've also got Pitt's Cottage Highlanders down on the bank of the River Team. They're not expecting to do any fighting, purely because they're in a far-flung area of the battlefield where the enemy are not going to cross the team and they're not going to cross the Severn. So they've really got it easy. They've just got to sit there and maybe fire at the parliamentarians on the far bank, really. William Keith is occupying Powick Bridge, which is actually behind the church where we're stood. The church is actually on the high ground. And they've just got to hold the bridge if parliamentarians come up from Upton. And in reserve over there, we've got Dial and Montgomery, and they're just to support the West Bank. But technically, majority of the fighting, or hopefully most of the fighting, will take place on the eastern bank. This side, you've got the obstacle of the Severn and the team. Too complicated to fight a battle here. So really, the fighting should be taking place over there. But what about the Parliament positions? Well, we know the parliamentarians took all the high ground around Worcester several days ago, before the 3rd of September. So we have Lambert, the man who shadowed the Scots. He pretty much had all the land up here, which included Rainbow Hill, Albury Hill, that sort of area of Worcester. Then we've got Harrison, that occupied the area of, for example, Red Hill, Perry Wood, all that sort of area along here. And even though I've got gaps in the line all the way across here, they were basically spread all the way across. I've just marked the main leading positions, Lambert, Harrison and so on. Now down here is Upton upon Severn, and down here on the eastern side we have Oliver Cromwell, who's actually moved up very close to the confluence of the Severn and the Team here. And then we've got Fleetwood and Dean, who's marched in column down the main road north from Upton, and they have now fanned out. So they're commanding all of this area here. So we've got Dean to the far left, and then we've got Fleetwood on the bank of the Severn there. So that is the position at 6 a.m. on the 3rd of September 1651. So imagine being here 369 years ago. Well, we know that around about 6 a.m. the thunderstorm that started in the early hours had started to move north in that direction. So if you were a Scottish soldier stood here at the church, you probably spent most of that thunderstorm, whilst the lightning was flashing and the rumbling of the thunder and maybe hail and rain, probably inside that church. If not, if you were stood out here, you would now be pretty wet, basically. And then as the thunderstorm disappeared to the north, it started to get very, very humid. We know this because it was hot in the days up to the Battle of Worcester, probably the reason why we had a thunderstorm on the 3rd of September. And then once the thunderstorm had gone, famously everyone says, oh, it will be a bit cooler now. No, it started to get warmer and warmer. So the day was going to be clear and pretty sunny, very humid, we know that. Now, as the thunderstorm rumbled off into the distance, the Scots would have readied themselves for the fight. And in the distance, behind where Ian's filming, down towards Upton, down towards Kemsey, the royalists here would have heard in the distance the sound of the drums of the new model army. The opening stages of the Battle of Worcester was just around about dawn, as the parliamentarians advanced from Upton, and you would have heard their drums as they advanced onto Powick Church. Now, by around about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, the advance guard of those parliamentarians would have started engaging with the royalists holding this high ground. And I would advise you, do come out to Powick Church, because when you drive towards it, if you walk around it, it is actually on a raised area overlooking the floodplain beyond. And this would have made a brilliant observation point for the Scots up here. And we know there would have been a firefight in this churchyard, right up to the wall itself, and maybe even in the church. We don't know that, but there was a very violent fight here. And we can still see, even today, and this is why I say do visit the church, the bullet holes on the church tower beyond me here. Now hopefully you can see them. There is a splattering of bullet marks there, and you can imagine the Scots even going back up to that wall there and firing at the parliamentarians in that direction. And these would have been bullets from the Parliament soldiers aiming at the Scots that were around the base of the church and even in the church tower above. So it would have been a fierce fight, but we know it would have been a short fight, because what happened afterwards is the Scots holding this bit of high ground, this church technically, would have fled in that direction all the way down to the bank, heading to the valley where the River Teme is and where the Powick Bridge stands. And next to the bridge would have been a watermill, and that would have been the next line of defence. So on the morning of the 3rd of September 1651, as the thunderstorm disappeared into the distance, the parliamentarians advanced and the first attack was thrown in on Powick Church, this high ground overlooking Powick Bridge. Didn't last very long, the bullet marks are still here, and the royalists fled down the hill back to Powick Bridge. They're going to hold that bank of the River Teme. That's the only crossing point, remember, on that River Teme, unless you go miles up to Bransford. So this is a key strategic location. Remember, Pittscotty and William Keith are over there down on the riverside, and Pittscotty thinks he's got it easy. No one's going to attack him down there because he has water to the front, that's the River Teme, and he has water to his left flank being the River Severn. He has got it easy down there. Or has he? Anyway, on that note, this is the first of our videos on the 3rd of September. Follow the battle, please subscribe, follow the battle all day from the opening shots at 6 AM down to the final fighting in the streets at around about 10 o'clock or even midnight on the 3rd of September. On that note, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.